you know that shortly before a plane carrying 3 members of the Nelons crashed in Wyoming, its pilot declared an emergency to air traffic control? This fact was detailed in a preliminary report from the National Transportation Safety Board recently. The investigation remains ongoing, but a similar situation involving the same type of aircraft occurred years ago, making a visible eerie connection between the two incidents. So, what exactly happened to the Nelons aircraft at 25,000 feet, according to the new report? What connections can be drawn between this tragedy and the 2012 PC-12 incident? Could this lead to further inquiries about the aircraft's safety? This tragic case begins when 3 members of the Nelon family boarded the aircraft for what was intended to be a routine flight. Unfortunately, something went terribly wrong, and the plane crashed, claiming the lives of all on board. However, the truth is, the investigation for this case is underway by NTSB, and what we know from the observation is that this case has some similarities with another PC-12 crash from back in 2012. The picture on the screen is from the crash in 2012. The story behind this image is even more shocking and tragic. What makes this situation even more distressing is how it connects to the Nelons plane crash, an aspect that no one has yet discussed in detail. The victims of Nelons' crash, Jason, Kelly, and Amber Nelon, were integral members of the Southern gospel music group, the Nelons. For those who may not know, the Nelons are well known and have won multiple honors throughout the years. They are inducted into the Gospel Music Association Hall of Fame. One of the group's most important members, Jason Clark, 50, regrettably took a video right before the disastrous flight.
Montana. There's our wonderful pilot. This is the dude right there. This is Larry. This is the co-pilot.
Accompanying him was his wife, Kelly Nelon Clark, who was 64 years old at the time. Kelly had been a celebrated singer for over 45 years and was honored with a Lifetime Achievement Award in 2017. She shared on social media the morning of the flight, skies and no storms. Amber Nelon Kistler, just 35 years old, was also present. She was Kelly's daughter from a previous marriage, and she had become a gifted vocalist like her mother. Amber was well known for her singing abilities and was honored with the 2014 Female Vocalist of the Year award. Amber was accompanied by her husband, Nathan Kistler, 34. Melody Hodges, a 53-year-old band assistant and a valued friend of the family, was traveling with them. Melissa Haney, 65, and her husband, Larry Haney, 67, who was the aircraft's pilot in command, were also on board. With years of experience, Larry had accepted the pilot's seat on that fateful day. If the Nelon family's story seems tragic, it becomes even more heart-wrenching when considering what happened to the other family in 2012, the Bramlage family. Ron, Becky, and their 4 children all perished when their plane crashed just 30 minutes after takeoff. What makes this even more chilling is that they too were flying the same type of aircraft, a Pilatus PC-12, the very same model the Nelons were on. The investigation into the Bramlage family's crash uncovered a series of shocking details that strangely link these two incidents. For now, the investigation into the Nelon family's crash is ongoing, and the National Transportation Safety Board, NTSB, still has a long road ahead. One of the first areas of focus will undoubtedly be on the pilot, Larry Haney, and the decisions made during the flight. But beyond the pilot's actions, many are left wondering, could there be deeper concerns surrounding the safety of this particular aircraft model? Could this plane be a common thread in these tragedies? The pilot. Larry Haney was the pilot flying the aircraft that carried the Nelons. His background is both accomplished and complex. Larry began his career in law enforcement in the 1970s, and over time, he established himself as a successful business owner. He also served as chairman of the board for the Georgia Department of Corrections and was highly active in his local church. However, to truly understand the depth of his life, it's essential to consider the personal tragedies he endured. Larry and his wife had 2 children, but their son Jared died tragically in 2006 at the age of 19 due to a motorcycle accident. One of the most heartbreaking details, which has not been widely discussed, is that Larry's daughter, Lissa, passed away just 9 days before the plane crash that claimed the lives of Larry and his wife. Lissa was only 41 years old. In the video recorded before the flight, Larry and his wife appeared to be in good spirits. Yet it's difficult to imagine the emotional weight of outliving both of one's children. While this fact may not directly relate to the cause of the crash, it is an important detail that cannot be ignored. Grief is a powerful emotion, and everyone processes it differently. It is not to suggest that this was the reason for the crash, but rather, it's an important piece of the larger narrative that may have been weighing on Larry's mind. Larry had a private pilot license that was issued in 2011, according to the FAA. In addition to his instrument rating, he held ratings for aircraft, with 1 and several engines. The aircraft he was flying on that tragic day was a 2010 Pilatus PC-12, which he had owned since 2014 under Haney Enterprises, albeit the exact amount of his flight hours is still unknown. Given that this aircraft has been flown from his home airstrip multiple times a month, based on the flight history that is now available, it is likely that Larry had some experience piloting the PC-12. The aircraft. Being certified as a single-pilot aircraft makes the Pilatus PC-12 special. This indicates that Larry was exempt from having a second pilot on board for the duration of the flight. But an aircraft isn't always the greatest or safest choice just because it can be flown by one person. The PC-12 is a complex, high-performing aircraft featuring retractable landing gear and a pressurized cabin. Because of its sophisticated avionics and automation, it can be operated by one person. However, the same automation that makes flying easier may also result in complacency or an excessive dependence on technology, which is why it's important to recognize one's own limitations and ask for assistance when necessary. Regarding the aircraft itself, the PC-12 is widely known for its reliability. It's still unknown, though, if any mechanical problems had anything to do with the Nelons collision. The flight data is currently the only tangible proof that is available, and the investigation is still ongoing. Until additional information is released, many things are still unknown. The tragic tragedy of the Nelons must therefore be paralleled with that of the Bramlage family, who also lost their lives in a crash involving a Pilatus PC-12. The relationship between these two occurrences might provide important information on what went wrong in each instance. Nelons flight. On July 26, 2024, the Nelon family, along with their close friends, boarded a plane at Nebraska City Municipal Airport for a flight to Billings Airport in Montana. The weather at both airports was relatively calm, with mostly clear skies. However, a cold front was expected to impact their route. Although there are currently no concrete details about how this weather system affected the flight, it is reasonable to believe that it could have played a significant role in the events that followed. The Air Safety Institute provided an analysis that indicated an AIRMET had been issued for possible moderate turbulence in the area where the aircraft ultimately crashed. The advisory applied to altitudes from flight level 280 up to flight level 420. However, based on flight data, The Nelon aircraft was flying at 26,000 feet when the first signs of trouble began, which makes it difficult to determine how much of an impact turbulence may have had on the tragedy. Flight data shows that Larry Haney, the pilot, had been using the autopilot for the majority of the trip. After climbing to an altitude of 24,000 feet, the plane cruised at that level for roughly an hour before ascending to 26,000 feet. It was at this altitude when the autopilot suddenly disengaged for reasons still under investigation. At this point, Larry initiated a climbing right-hand turn. The aircraft's vertical rate of climb or descent, measured in feet per minute, indicated that the plane briefly climbed to about 26,500 feet. Though the specific cause remains unknown, flight data shows that Larry soon began to descend at a rate of about 2,000 to 3,000 feet per minute after the autopilot disconnect. According to reports, Larry made a radio call to air traffic control stating that he was trying to regain control of the aircraft, but no additional details have been released. During this initial turn, the plane descended to approximately 25,200 feet before abruptly entering a rapid climb at a rate of 5,000 to 6,000 feet per minute. Such a steep climb can be disorienting, especially if the aircraft was flying through weather conditions affected by the cold front. Disorientation at high altitudes, particularly in poor visibility, can be extremely dangerous for pilots. At this point, the plane's airspeed, specifically ground speed, began to decay rapidly. The ground speed, which takes wind conditions at altitude into account, decreased to roughly 130 knots, and the aircraft reached a maximum altitude of 27,400 feet before starting a left-hand turn. This is where the situation spiraled out of control. The aircraft transitioned from the climb to a steep descent at a rate of at least 10,000 feet per minute, with the plane turning back to the right. Flight data reveals that during this descent, the airspeed increased rapidly. Toward the end of the flight, some of the recorded data becomes inconsistent, potentially due to structural failure. When an aircraft experiences extreme forces, it can break apart in mid-air, which could explain why local authorities found debris scattered over a wide area. This tragic series of events concluded with the crash, resulting in the loss of all lives on board. According to the latest report, an air traffic controller in Salt Lake City asked the pilot where he would like to land but got no response. Haney eventually said he was trying to get control of the airplane, according to the report. The controller reached back out twice, hearing nothing. The Federal Aviation Administration released an alert notice for the airplane after radio and radar contact was lost, the report said. Law enforcement found the crash site about 12 miles northeast of Recluse, Wyoming. It sparked a wildfire that burned through 40 acres. One witness said they heard a loud whining noise and saw smoke rising. Another said they saw the airplane turn a barrel roll before impact, according to the report. Debris from the left wing and other parts of the airplane was scattered more than half a mile away from the main wreckage site. Now that more details of the Nelons' tragic flight have come to light, it is crucial to explore the story of the Bramlage family, who faced a similar fate under similar circumstances. The connection between these two incidents may provide further insight into the dangers associated with this type of aircraft and weather conditions. The tragic fate of Bramlage family. These images are from the wreckage of the Bramlage family plane crash, a devastating incident that claimed the lives of Ron, Becky, and their 4 children. The family had just enjoyed a vacation in the Bahamas, and after flying to Fort Pierce, Florida, to go through customs, everything appeared to be going smoothly. However, only a few hours after leaving Florida, their journey took a tragic turn. About 30 minutes after takeoff, the aircraft crashed, ending their lives far too soon. Ron Bramlage, aged 45 at the time of the accident, was the pilot of the aircraft. According to the investigation, Ron had logged his very first flight back in February 1994. Over the years, he flew a variety of single-engine piston aircraft and earned his instrument rating in 1997. However, from 1997 to 2004, Ron logged only 28 hours of actual instrument flight time, which amounts to an average of just 4 hours per year. This limited experience was not enough to maintain proficiency in instrument flying, a crucial skill when operating in challenging weather or low visibility conditions. Ron's transition to turbine engine aircraft came much later. His first known flight in such an aircraft occurred in 2009, when he logged 7.5 hours of dual instruction in a Piper PA-46 Malibu Meridian. However, his logbook showed no subsequent flights in turbine-powered aircraft for the next 3 years. It was not until April 30th, 2012, that Ron decided to purchase a 2006 Pilatus PC-12 to take his family on vacations. In preparation for flying the PC-12, Ron hired a flight instructor for one flight, during which they took the aircraft to Arizona for further training. Over a 10-day period, Ron attended ground school and accumulated approximately 19 hours of flight time, of which only 3.6 hours were in actual instrument conditions. Despite the intensive training, concerns remained about Ron's abilities. During this training, he was paired with Tim, a retired airline captain with over 21,000 hours of flight experience. Tim noticed that Ron struggled to keep up with the demands of flying the PC-12. On one occasion, Ron forgot to retract the landing gear after takeoff, and on another, he exceeded his assigned altitude by 1,500 feet. Tim also observed that Ron showed no improvement in flying approaches during their training sessions. As the training came to a close, Ron mentioned his plans to fly his family to the Bahamas. Tim strongly advised him to reconsider, suggesting that Ron bring another pilot along for the trip and gain more experience before undertaking such a journey. Tim emphasized that even though Ron was legally qualified to fly the PC-12 solo, that did not necessarily mean it was the safest option. Tim himself, despite his vast experience, planned to undergo more dual instruction before flying a PC-12 alone. He wanted Ron to understand that proficiency and safety go beyond meeting the minimum legal requirements. However, Ron did not follow this advice. In the weeks leading up to the fatal flight, Ron logged an additional 8.5 hours of single-pilot flight time in the PC-12, but only 2 of those hours were in actual instrument conditions. By the time Ron embarked on the trip to the Bahamas, his total flight experience amounted to approximately 755 hours. Yet, of those hours, only 45 were in turbine-powered aircraft, with just 38 hours in the Pilatus PC-12. Perhaps most concerning of all, Ron had logged less than 4 hours of actual instrument flight time in the previous 8 years. These factors paint a concerning picture, as flying a complex aircraft like the PC-12 under less than ideal conditions without sufficient experience in instrument flying is a risky endeavor. The similarities between Ron's situation and the tragic fate of the Nelon family raise significant questions about the demands of operating such advanced aircraft and the importance of continuous training and preparation. The flights from Kansas to the Bahamas and then back to Florida were uneventful. These successful flights likely strengthened Ron's confidence in his ability to handle the aircraft on his own, believing that everything would proceed smoothly. As preparations were made to leave Florida, it is known that Ron filed an IFR, Instrument Flight Rules, flight plan. However, there is no evidence suggesting he received an official weather briefing before taking off. Had Ron obtained that briefing, he might have been alerted to the storms sweeping across Florida. Shortly after takeoff, approximately 2 minutes into the flight, air traffic control warned Ron about an area of moderate to heavy precipitation just 15 miles ahead, stretching about 30 miles wide. Ron responded with a simple "thank you" and was then transferred to the next controller. Only 4 minutes later, another warning was issued regarding the impending weather. This time, Ron asked whether it would be necessary to fly around the storm system, and the controller cleared him to deviate north if needed. According to details from the flight data, despite receiving clearance to deviate around the weather, there was no attempt made by Ron to change course. Instead, the aircraft maintained a northwest heading until the controller authorized a climb to flight level 260. This altitude is significant, as it matches the altitude at which the Nelon family's aircraft encountered severe difficulties, leading to loss of control. 10 seconds after the climb clearance, the controller once again warned Ron of the storm ahead, suggesting he examine it closely and deviate to the right, recommending a heading to the north of the weather. Ron acknowledged the suggestion and requested to fly a heading of 320 degrees, which was promptly approved by the controller. In addition, Ron was given permission to deviate even further to the right, if necessary, to avoid the storm. Tragically, this would be the last radio transmission Ron would acknowledge, marking the beginning of the end of the ill-fated flight. Approximately 4 seconds after reaching a shallow climb, just above 25,000 feet, the autopilot disengaged. At the time of the disconnection, the aircraft was traveling at an indicated airspeed of about 109 knots, with a right bank angle of less than 25 degrees. This is a critical moment in flight, as once the autopilot disconnects, the immediate task should be to regain manual control by leveling the wings and flying the aircraft. Only after stabilizing the aircraft should attention turn back to the autopilot or any other system. However, instead of promptly addressing the aircraft's increasing bank angle, the situation deteriorated further. The bank angle continued to steepen, eventually reaching 50 degrees, and the aircraft began descending. Within 13 seconds of the autopilot disconnection, rather than prioritizing control of the aircraft,